Imagine standing at the very edge of the world, where the relentless Atlantic waves crash against the jagged cliffs of Long Island's easternmost tip. It is a place of stark, windswept beauty, known to tourists for its lighthouse and its fishing, but to those who listen closely to the whispers of history, it is known for something far darker. Looming over the tree line of Montauk Point State Park stands a relic, a rusting giant that refuses to die, the AN/FPS-35 radar dish. A massive slab of steel and concrete, it sits atop the abandoned Camp Hero, silent now, fixed in one direction, staring unblinkingly out at the ocean. But locals will tell you that there was a time when it turned. They will tell you that there was a time when the radio interference was so strong it bled through their phone lines, playing sounds that weren't music, weren't voices, but something like screams trapped in static. This is not just a story about a military base. This is a story about the fragility of reality itself. It is the story of the Montauk Project, a descent into a rabbit hole so deep that it blurs the line between science fiction and cold, hard history. A conspiracy that suggests the government didn't just want to control your enemies, they wanted to edit the very timeline of your existence. To understand the nightmare of Montauk, we cannot start in the neon-soaked era of the 1980s. We must drift back through the fog of war to 1943, to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The world was burning, and the United States Navy was desperate for an edge. They turned to the brightest minds of the century, men like Nikola Tesla, John von Neumann, and Albert Einstein. The goal was technically defensive, radar invisibility. They called it Project Rainbow. The objective was to wrap the USS Eldridge, a Cannon-class destroyer escort, in a powerful electromagnetic field that would bend light and radar waves around the ship, rendering it invisible to the enemy. But when they flipped the switch on that humid summer day, they got more than they bargained for. The ship didn't just disappear from radar. Witnesses claimed it vanished from physical sight entirely, leaving only a greenish electric fog. When the Eldridge reappeared, it wasn't the same. The crew was nauseous, disoriented, screaming in agony. But the true horror was found below deck. Sailors were fused into the metal bulkheads, arms buried in steel, legs merged with the deck plates, their molecules inextricably scrambled with the ship itself. The Navy, terrified by the grotesque results, officially scrubbed the project. They claimed it never happened. But knowledge, once gained, is rarely thrown away. It is merely buried, waiting for a place dark enough to grow. That place was Camp Hero. Decades later, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the research from the Philadelphia disaster was dusted off. The focus had shifted. The military no longer just wanted stealth, they wanted psychological warfare. They wanted to understand how electromagnetic fields affected the human mind. Funding came not from official channels, but, according to the whistleblowers, from a massive cache of Nazi gold recovered in Europe, a black budget so deep it had no bottom. The isolated Air Force Base at Montauk, technically decommissioned, yet bustling with strange activity, became the new laboratory. The giant radar dish, the SAGE radar, became the primary tool. It was capable of broadcasting specific frequencies, arguably the same frequencies that resonate with human consciousness. The residents of Montauk began to complain of headaches, strange moods, and animals acting aggressively, unaware that they were the control group in an experiment of unprecedented scale. Enter Preston Nichols, an electronics engineer who would become the central figure in unraveling this mystery. Nichols claimed to have worked at the base, though for years he didn't remember it. This is the most insidious part of the Montauk narrative, the weaponization of memory. Nichols lived a normal life until strange glitches began to appear. Flashbacks, technical knowledge he shouldn't possess, and an inexplicable familiarity with the derelict base. Through regression therapy, the dam broke. He remembered the Montauk chair. This was the crown jewel of the project, a device heavily modified from alien technology, allegedly from a crashed craft, designed to interface directly with a psychic's mind. The chair was surrounded by coils and sensors, feeding the psychic's thoughts into a massive IBM computer, which then translated those thoughts into digital code, amplified them through the radar dish, and broadcast them into the world. The goal was simple, yet terrifying: manifestation. If the psychic thought of a solid object, could the machine make it appear? If the psychic visualized a person acting in a certain way, could they override that person's free will? The primary subject for the chair was a man named Duncan Cameron. Duncan was unique, a powerful psychic whose history was tragically intertwined with the USS Eldridge decades prior. In the chair, Duncan would enter a trance. The scientists, led by cold, pragmatic men who viewed ethics as an obstacle, would command him to focus. "Visualize a can of soda," they would say, and on a table in the room, a ghostly, shimmering image of a soda can would flicker into existence. At first, these manifestations were non-tangible, mere phantoms. But as they poured more power into the chair, as the radar dish pulsed with gigawatts of energy, the phantoms became solid. They achieved the creation of matter from thought. But the ambition of the Montauk Project didn't stop at creating objects. They wanted to manipulate time. The connection between consciousness and time is a concept philosophers have debated for centuries, but at Montauk, they treated it as an engineering problem. They discovered that by tuning the equipment to a specific frequency, they could rip a hole in the fabric of space-time. They called it the time tunnel. It was described not as a machine you stepped into, but a vortex you walked through, a swirling, helical tunnel lit by a strange organic light. Inside, it felt like being pulled by a current. Nichols and others claimed that they sent operatives through this tunnel. They sent them to the past to influence the outcome of wars. They sent them to the future to scout the ruins of civilization. They even claimed to have established a stable link back to 1943, to the very deck of the USS Eldridge, creating a closed time loop that explained why the ship vanished. It had been pulled into the hyperspace created by Montauk in 1983.
But the experiments grew darker. The base required fresh subjects. Rumors swirled of the Montauk boys, runaways, orphans, and abducted teenagers pulled off the streets of New York and surrounding areas. These boys were reportedly broken down physically and psychologically, subjected to intense programming to become sleeper agents, commandos who could be activated by a code phrase, or worse, fuel for the experiments that often ended in death. The darker corners of the Camp Hero subterranean levels were said to be filled with the psychic debris of these lost souls. It creates a harrowing image. Beneath the scenic picnic areas and the lighthouse where families took vacation photos, children were being strapped into chairs, their minds flayed open by scientists playing God. The hubris of the project was its undoing. You cannot tear at the fabric of reality without reality tearing back. By August of 1983, the energy levels were critical. The connection to the 1943 Eldridge event was unstable. Duncan Cameron, exhausted and tortured by years of exploitation, decided it had to end. During a session in the chair, while deep in a trance, Duncan didn't visualize a harmless object. He tapped into the primal reptilian part of his brain. He visualized a monster. He unleashed the beast from the id. Witnesses, those who survived to recover their memories, described chaos. The equipment sparked and exploded. The walls shook, and somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the base, a creature materialized. It wasn't a hologram. It was a massive, hairy, terrifying beast. A physical manifestation of pure fear and rage. It rampaged through the base, tearing through steel doors and concrete. The security forces were powerless. Bullets did nothing to a creature born of the mind. In the control room, panic reigned. Preston Nichols realized that the machine was sustaining the monster. As long as the radar dish was powered, the beast would exist. He and the other rebels within the project tried to shut it down, but the switches were jammed, fused by the massive surge of energy. In a final act of desperation, Nichols grabbed an axe and began smashing the conduits, severing the heavy power cables that fed the transmitter. The hum of the radar died. The lights flickered and failed. As the power faded, the beast shimmered, phasing out of our reality, dissolving back into the nightmare ether from which it came. The base was evacuated. The lower levels were flooded and sealed with cement to bury the evidence. The participants were brainwashed, their memories wiped or overlaid with screen memories, fake, mundane recollections to hide the trauma. They were released back into their lives, ticking bombs of repressed history. Camp Hero was officially closed. The land turned over to the state park system. The radar dish was left to rust, a silent tombstone for the impossible. Today, if you visit Montauk, you can walk the trails. You can see the boarded-up concrete bunkers peering out from the overgrown brush. You can stand in the shadow of the radar tower. The military denies everything, of course. They say it was just a radar station, part of the SAGE network to detect Soviet bombers. They say the underground levels don't exist. But hikers still report strange things. They talk of finding inexplicable electrical cables jutting out of the eroding cliffs, leading nowhere. They speak of strange no zones where compasses spin wildly and a sudden sense of dread washes over them. And then there are the stories of the Montauk boys, now grown men, who experience sudden violent nightmares of a chair, a tunnel, and a beast. The Montauk Project remains one of the most enduring and complex conspiracy theories in American history because it touches on our deepest fears, that our government is not only keeping secrets, but altering the very nature of our lives, that our memories might not be our own, and that there are doors to other times and other dimensions that should never be opened. It inspired Stranger Things not just because of the monsters or the psychic kids, but because of the setting, a small government-run facility hiding a world-ending secret beneath the veneer of bureaucratic banality. As the sun sets over Montauk Point, casting long, distorted shadows across the abandoned concrete, one question lingers in the salt air. If the project was truly shut down, if the time tunnels were collapsed and the psychic amplifiers destroyed, why does the site remain so heavily guarded? Why are there reports of new construction, of black SUVs with tinted windows entering the defunct gates at midnight? Perhaps the experiment didn't end in 1983. Perhaps they just learned to hide it better. Or perhaps, in some closed loop of time, the chair is still humming, Duncan is still dreaming, and we are all just living in the shadow of the radar, waiting for the static to clear. But to truly comprehend the enormity of Montauk, we must peel back the layers of silence that settled over Camp Hero after the catastrophic events of August 1983. The beast was gone, the power cables severed, but the echoes of what transpired there did not just simply vanish. To understand the full scope, we must look away from the flashing lights of the radar tower and focus on the shadows, specifically the human shadows, the collateral damage of a quest for godhood. While Duncan Cameron was the star, the psychic key that unlocked the cosmos, he was far from the only victim to be strapped into the machinery of the mind. There is a chapter of the Montauk Project that is whispered about with even more trepidation than the monsters or the time loops, and that is the chapter of the Montauk Boys. Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, a disturbing pattern emerged in the quiet townships of Long Island and the bustling boroughs of New York City. It was a pattern of disappearances, of runaways who were never found, and of troubled youths who were taken into custody and then seemed to vanish into the gears of the state system. Conspiracy theorists and recovering survivors posit that these were not random tragedies, they were recruitment drives. The project needed raw material. The scientists had discovered that the prepubescent and adolescent mind, specifically the male mind, possessed a pliability and an energetic resonance that was essential for the programming. They weren't just looking for psychics, they were looking for processors. They needed human hard drives capable of holding the data that the great IBM computers couldn't process fast enough.
These boys were allegedly brought to the subterranean levels of Camp Hero, dragged down freight elevators into the damp, ozone-smelling bowels of the base. There, the light of the sun never reached. The air hummed with the constant, maddening vibration of the Delta T antenna. Survivors tell of a room that became the center of their universe, the programming room. It was here that the psyche was systematically fractured. Using a combination of extreme trauma, hallucinogenic drugs, and electromagnetic bombardment, the scientists would split the boys' consciousness. They created alters, compartmentalized personalities. One personality might be the terrified child, but another, buried deep behind a wall of amnesia, was the soldier, the assassin, or the psychic conduit. This was the ultimate evolution of the CIA's MK-Ultra program, refined and perfected in the isolation of Montauk Point. The purpose of these boys was manifold. Some were used as boosters for Duncan Cameron, sitting in a circle around the chair to amplify his psychic signal, their life force drained to fuel the machine. Others were trained for away missions. This brings us to the most fantastical and controversial claim of the entire Montauk mythos, the exploration of Mars. It sounds like pulp fiction, but within the files of the Montauk researchers, it is treated as cold fact. The time tunnel didn't just traverse time, it traversed space. The scientists discovered that the ancients, perhaps the same civilization that influenced the pyramids of Egypt, had left remnants on the Red Planet. They believed there was an underground installation on Mars, a defense grid left by a dead race, and they wanted it. The narrative goes that the Montauk chair was used to pinpoint the location of these ruins. Once locked on, the tunnel was opened, but they couldn't send tanks or large battalions. They sent the Montauk boys, clad in specially designed suits to protect them from the harsh Martian atmosphere and the pressure variances of the portal. These young operatives were ordered to march into the swirling vortex at Camp Hero and step out onto the dusty, red surface of another world, millions of miles away. Their mission was reconnaissance and retrieval. They were to enter the subterranean caverns of Mars, map the ancient technology, and report back. Some survivors claim they found statues of monolithic proportions, vast halls of records, and machinery that was still humming after millennia of abandonment. But the cost was high. The stability of the portal was erratic. Some boys stepped into the tunnel and were simply atomized, lost in the drift between worlds. Others arrived on Mars but could not be retrieved, left to suffocate or starve in the silence of an alien tomb. Who was pulling the strings of such madness? It wasn't just the US military. The lore suggests a darker alliance. This is where the story intersects with the extraterrestrial. Technicians at the base reported seeing advisors who were not human. They described tall reptilian figures, or the classic gray aliens, standing in the shadows of the control rooms, observing the data readouts with cold black eyes. The theory suggests a technology transfer. The government gave the aliens access to human biology, the boys, the genetic material, and in exchange the aliens provided the hyper-technology to build the time tunnel and the mind control chair. It was a Faustian bargain of the highest order, selling the soul of humanity for the keys to the universe. But the experiments were not limited to off-world excursions. The most terrifying applications were domestic. The mood control experiments were conducted on the unsuspecting populace of Long Island. By adjusting the pulse rate and frequency of the SAGE radar dish, the scientists could blanket the entire region in a specific emotional signal. They could dial it to hopelessness, and crime rates and suicides in the surrounding towns would spike. They could dial it to apathy, and voter turnout would plummet. They could dial it to agitation, and riots would nearly break out at local bars and schools. The residents of Montauk were lab rats in a cage without bars, their feelings manipulated by a dial turned by a technician sipping coffee in a bunker 5 miles away. This was the ultimate goal, a population that could be controlled without them ever knowing they were in chains. As the years ground on, the fabric of the base itself began to warp. The constant tears in space-time created reality bubbles. Maintenance workers would walk down a hallway they had walked 1,000 times, only to find themselves in a version of the base from 1950, or a version that was overgrown with jungle vines. Phantom sounds, footsteps of people who weren't there, and the apparition of the hooded man, a specter often seen before a system failure, became common occurrences. The laws of physics were breaking down. The timeline was becoming a tangled knot. This instability is what gave the rebels, Preston Nichols, Duncan Cameron, and others, the leverage they needed to stage the sabotage of August '83. They knew that if the project wasn't stopped, the hole in reality would expand until it consumed the entire planet. When the end came, it was violent and swift, but the cleanup was slow and methodical. The cement trucks arrived in fleets. They poured thousands of tons of concrete into the elevator shafts, sealing the horrors of levels 4 through 9. They filled the tunnels where the boys had marched. They walled up the room where the chair sat. But concrete is porous. It cannot hold back the truth forever. In the years following the closure, nature began to reclaim Camp Hero. The roots of trees cracked the foundations, rainwater seeped into the sealed bunkers, and urban explorers began to find ways in. In the 1990s and 2000s, videos began to surface on the early internet. Grainy, handheld footage shot by teenagers who had shimmied through rusted ventilation ducts. They showed endless corridors with peeling paint, strange warning signs warning of high voltage where no power should exist, and rooms with shackles bolted to the floors. They found logbooks that hadn't been shredded, containing lists of names and dates that matched missing persons reports. They found the remains of electronic equipment that looked nothing like standard military issue, circuit boards with organic geometries, clearly non-terrestrial in design. And then there is the psychological fallout. Across America, there are men, now in their 50s and 60s, who suffer from unexplainable PTSD. They have no combat record, they have no history of abuse, yet they wake up screaming about the spinning chair or the red dust. They meet on online forums and support groups, comparing notes, realizing that their nightmares are actually fragmented memories. They remember the smell of the ozone. They remember the face of the beast. They remember the voice of the drill sergeant who told them they were no longer human, but weapons. These are the survivors of the Montauk Boys program, living testaments to a crime that history has officially forgotten. Even now, the story refuses to die. The Camp Hero State Park is a popular destination, but the rangers will tell you to stay on the path. They say it's because of unexploded ordnance or unstable structures. But watch the birds. Visitors often note that birds refuse to fly near the old radar dish. Compasses still spin erratically near the sealed bunker entrances, and occasionally, during severe electrical storms, the massive rusting dish at the top of the hill seems to hum, a low-frequency vibration that you feel in your teeth before you hear it with your ears. Is the Montauk Project truly over, or did it simply go deeper underground? Did the Phoenix Project, the rumored successor, take the technology to a new location, perhaps under the Denver airport or deep within the Pine Gap facility in Australia? The reality we perceive is fragile. We trust that yesterday leads to today, and today leads to tomorrow. But the story of Montauk suggests that this linearity is an illusion, a curtain that was pulled back once, revealing the chaotic, swirling abyss of time and mind behind it. And once you have seen the abyss, you can never truly close your eyes again. The radar may be silent, But the signal never really stopped.